He thought I was just an old woman, a nuisance he could publicly humiliate. He had no idea that his casual cruelty on a hot summer day was about to cost him everything. The heat was the thick, sticky kind that clings to your skin like a second shirt. I had just come from a small outpatient procedure at the clinic, nothing serious, but the doctor said to take it easy for the rest of the day. My son, the mayor of this little town, was supposed to pick me up, but he was tied up in a council meeting that was running late. So I found a shady bench in the town square, right by my prized petunias that I'd helped the city gardening club plant last spring. I just needed to sit for a minute, to let the world stop spinning before I walked the last few blocks home. I closed my eyes, listening to the buzz of a bumblebee and the distant laughter of children. It was peaceful. That peace was shattered by a shadow falling over me. I opened my eyes to a pair of polished black boots. My gaze traveled up a crisp blue uniform to a face that was twisted into a permanent sneer. He was young, with a military-style haircut and eyes that held a cold, bored arrogance. A name tag on his chest read Miller. "You can't loiter here, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. I blinked, a little confused. "I'm Carol, 67 years old. I've lived in this town my entire life. I've baked cookies for the police bake sale for 30 years straight. Loitering wasn't exactly in my vocabulary." "Oh, I'm not loitering, officer," I said, my voice calm and polite. "I just had a small procedure at the clinic. I'm waiting for the dizziness to pass before I walk home." I even patted the manila envelope on my lap that held my discharge papers. He didn't even glance at it. He just stared at my face, and a nasty little smirk played on his lips. "Right. A procedure. Look, I don't have time for stories. This bench is for people to enjoy the square, not for vagrancy. You people need to move along." "Wiki?" "You people." The words hung in the humid air, heavy and ugly. Suddenly I wasn't Carol, the church volunteer and head of the gardening club. I was just one of you people. My politeness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger that settled deep in my bones. "I am enjoying the square," I said, my voice firmer now, "and I have every right to sit here. I am a tax-paying citizen of this town." Officer Miller actually chuckled, a short barking sound. He took a long, slow sip from a large plastic water bottle he was holding. Beads of condensation ran down the side. "Rights? Let me tell you about your rights. You have the right to get up and leave my town square before I decide to run you in for public nuisance." He took another swig of water, his eyes never leaving mine, daring me to challenge him. I wasn't going to be intimidated. Not by this boy in a uniform who probably wasn't even born when I was marching for civil rights. I stayed put, my back straight, my chin held high. I simply stared back at him, letting the silence stretch. I saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes. He wasn't used to being defied. "Fine," he finally hissed, his smirk turning into a scowl. "You seem a little overheated. Let me help you cool down." Before I could process what he meant, he unscrewed the cap of his water bottle. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the deliberate tilt of his wrist, the clear liquid catching the afternoon sun as it arched through the air. And then the shock of cold. Ice-cold water cascaded over my head, soaking my hair, running in rivulets down my face and neck, drenching the front of my favorite floral blouse. It seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the bone despite the summer heat. My discharge papers, the proof of my story, were instantly ruined, the ink bleeding into a blurry mess on the soggy paper. I gasped, more from shock and humiliation than the cold. He emptied the entire bottle on me, every last drop. People walking by stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort, but no one said a word. He tossed the empty bottle into a nearby trash can with a loud, satisfying clatter. "There," he said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Feel better now. Now get out of here before I come back with something a little stronger than water." He gave me one last look of utter contempt, then turned and began to swagger away, laughing to himself. I sat there, dripping and shivering, a hot knot of fury and shame burning in my chest. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give him the satisfaction. As I watched his retreating back, I heard the squeal of tires. A sleek black SUV, the kind the city reserved for top officials, pulled up to the curb with a lurch. The passenger door flew open, and a tall, imposing man in a pristine police chief's uniform stepped out, his face like thunder. "Miller," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the square. Officer Miller froze mid-swagger and spun around, his face instantly pale. "Chief Williams, sir, I didn't expect to see you here." The chief ignored his stammering, his eyes scanning the square with frantic urgency. "Cut the crap. We just got a priority call from the state police. We have a major situation. Have you seen her? She's supposed to be in this area." Miller looked utterly confused. "Her? Sir, who are we looking for?" Chief Williams ran a stressed hand over his face. "The mayor's mother, you idiot. Where is she?" And in that moment of pure, undiluted panic, Officer Miller's eyes shot around the square until they landed, with dawning horror, directly on me. He raised a trembling hand and pointed. Chief Williams's gaze followed the shaking finger, his eyes narrowing in confusion before they landed on me. For a split second there was just blank incomprehension. He saw a drenched, elderly black woman sitting on a bench. Then recognition flooded his face, and it was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The color drained from his cheeks. His jaw went slack. The frantic energy of a moment ago was replaced by a kind of cold, abject terror I had only ever seen on people who knew they were about to be in a car crash. "Oh no," he whispered, the words barely audible. He took a hesitant step toward me, his eyes wide. "Carol? Mrs. Henderson? What happened to you? Are you all right?" Before I could answer, Miller started babbling, his voice a high-pitched whine that was a pathetic shadow of his earlier bravado. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding, I swear. She was loitering, and she wouldn't identify herself. I thought she was a vagrant, a threat to public safety. I was just cooling her down, sir. It's a hot day." The chief spun on him so fast I thought he might get whiplash. The look on his face was murderous. "You thought—" he choked out, his voice dangerously low. "You thought Carol Henderson, the woman who runs the annual police charity drive, the woman who has lived in that same house on Elm Street for 45 years, was a vagrant?" He gestured wildly toward me. "Look at her. Does she look like a threat to you, you moron?" "I didn't know who she was," Miller pleaded, wringing his hands. "She didn't say she was the mayor's mother." That was it. That was the line that broke my silence. I gathered every ounce of dignity I had left, and slowly, deliberately, pushed myself to my feet. Water sloshed in my sensible walking shoes. My soaked blouse clung to me unpleasantly. I met Officer Miller's terrified gaze with a look as cold and hard as stone. "Why would that matter?" I asked, and my voice, though quiet, cut through the square like a razor. "Why would I need to be the mayor's mother to be treated with basic human respect? You didn't ask who I was. You called me you people, and told me to get out of your town square. You poured water on me because I dared to sit on a public bench while black." Every word landed like a physical blow. Miller flinched and shrunk away. Chief Williams looked like he was going to be physically ill. He opened his mouth to apologize, to say something, but just then a second city car, a sleek black sedan, pulled up behind the chief's SUV. My son, David, got out of the driver's seat. His tie was loosened, his face etched with the exhaustion of a long meeting. "Mom, I am so sorry," he began, his eyes on his phone as he walked toward me. "The council meeting went forever. He looked up, and his voice died in his throat. He saw me. He saw my drenched clothes, my soaking hair, the puddle at my feet. He saw the panicked cop and the horrified police chief. The exhaustion vanished from his face, replaced by a dark, thunderous rage that I had not seen since he was a teenager who'd found a bully picking on his little sister. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. He was no longer David, my boy. He was Mayor Henderson, and he was in charge. Chief Williams stepped forward, his face ashen. "Mayor, there's been an incident, a grave misjudgment on the part of Officer Miller." David's eyes flickered from the chief to the stammering, sweating wreck that was Officer Miller, and then back to me. His gaze softened for just a moment, filled with concern and love. He walked right past the two officers and put a gentle, steadying hand on my arm. "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Seeing his protective anger on my behalf was almost enough to make the tears I'd been holding back finally fall. David turned, his body language shifting back to one of pure authority. He looked at Officer Miller, who was now trembling visibly. "You," the mayor said, his voice laced with ice. "You did this to my mother." Miller's face crumpled. The last of his pathetic bravado shattered into a million pieces. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Mayor Henderson, sir, please. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll pay for her clothes. I'll... He looked wildly from my son's furious face to my own. His eyes were wide with desperation as he realized his career, his future, was hanging by a single thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. My son watched the officer's pathetic display for a moment before turning his gaze entirely to me. He ignored Miller completely, as if he were a piece of garbage on the sidewalk. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the entire city. "Mom," he said, his eyes locking with mine, "tell me what you want me to do." The entire square seemed to be holding its breath. Officer Miller stood frozen, his mouth agape, his pathetic pleas hanging in the air. Chief Williams was a statue carved from regret. All eyes were on me. My son, David, the mayor, had given me the power, and for a moment I savored it. I looked at the young man who had tried to humiliate me, who had seen my skin color and decided I was worthless. I saw the raw, primal fear in his eyes, not fear of justice, but fear of consequence. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he did it to the wrong person. I started, my voice gaining strength with every word. "I want him to understand." David's brow furrowed slightly. "Understand what, Mom?" I took a step away from my son's comforting arm, standing on my own 2 feet to face Officer Miller directly. "I want him to understand what it feels like, to be judged in an instant, to be made to feel small and invisible, to be treated like you are less than human simply for existing." I let the words sink in. Miller was shaking his head, sweat beading on his forehead. "I do understand. I get it. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Henderson. Please, I have a family." So do I cut him off sharply. "And today, you threatened my family. You threatened this whole community. Because your kind of hate, your kind of blind prejudice is a poison. It seeps into everything and rots it from the inside out." I turned to Chief Williams. "And you, Chief, how many other Officer Millers do you have on your force? How many other people in this town have been cooled down on a hot day but didn't have the mayor for a son?" The chief couldn't meet my gaze. He looked down at his polished shoes, the shame radiating off him in waves. My son stepped forward again, his voice ringing with the authority I had taught him to use for good. "Chief Williams," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you will place Officer Miller on immediate, unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation. And I want the results of that investigation on my desk by Friday." "Yes, Mayor," the chief said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at Miller. "Miller, your badge and your weapon. Now." Miller looked like he had been struck by lightning. He fumbled at his belt, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unclip his holster. He handed his service weapon and his badge to the chief, who took them without a word. The sneering, arrogant officer was gone. In his place was just a boy, stripped of his power, his face a mask of disbelief and utter ruin. But I wasn't finished. David had offered me vengeance, but what I wanted was change. "That's not enough," I said, looking from my son to the chief. David looked at me, his expression questioning, but trusting. "What else, Mom?" "The investigation is a start," I said. "But I want mandatory, citywide de-escalation and implicit bias training for the entire police department, starting next week. And I don't want some online course they can click through. I want real, in-person workshops run by outside experts. I want it to be rigorous, and I want it to be repeated every year. I want every officer in this town to look at every citizen black, white, brown, young, old, and see a person, not a problem." Chief Williams looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. There was a flicker of something in them respect. "It will be done, Mrs. Henderson," he said, and I knew he meant it. "And as for you," I said, turning my attention back to the now former Officer Miller. He was just a man in a blue shirt, no longer a symbol of authority. He was just a person who had made a terrible choice. I don't want your apology because it isn't real. I want you to do community service, not picking up trash on the highway. I want you to volunteer. At the soup kitchen downtown. At the community center in the Southside neighborhood. I want you to spend the next 200 hours looking into the faces of the you people you hold in such contempt. I want you to learn their names, hear their stories, and maybe, just maybe, you'll start to see them as human beings." Miller just stared at me, dumbfounded. It was a punishment he couldn't have imagined. It was worse than jail. It was education. My son put his arm around my shoulders again, this time pulling me into a proud, warm hug. "Consider it done," he said, his voice firm. He looked over my head at Miller. "You'll get the details of your service assignment from my office. Do not miss a single hour." With that, my son guided me toward his car, leaving the chief to deal with the wreckage of his officer. As I got in, I looked back. I saw Miller standing alone in the middle of the square, a lost and broken man, finally forced to confront the ugliness inside himself. I didn't feel triumph, and I didn't feel pity. I felt a sliver of hope. It was a small victory on a hot summer day, but sometimes a small victory is enough to start watering the seeds of real change. And as we drove away, leaving my beautiful, slightly trampled petunias behind, I knew I had done more than just stand up for myself. I had stood up for everyone,